Hello class, today we're going to talk about multiplying decimals. So the first thing I would like for you to think about is what are the three steps that we've talked about to multiply decimals? Well, the first step is line up your numbers. So in addition and subtraction, we line up our decimals. But in multiplication, I want you to line up your numbers as though the decimal weren't even there. So if I've got a 3-digit number and a 2-digit number, no matter where the decimals are in those numbers, I want you to line up the numbers. Okay? The second thing that I want you to do after you line up your numbers is, well, solve the problem. Solve the problem. Okay? That means multiply it. Okay? And then the last step that we have to do is find out where the decimal goes. So we put our decimal in the answer. Okay, so in this video, those are the things that we're going to be looking at. So let's look at our first problem. So our first problem is 7.2 times 6. Now what I'd like for us to look at, to do that third step, put your decimal in the answer, I'd like for us to look at that through estimation. Okay, before we actually look at our rule, let's do it through estimation. So what I'd like for you to do when we talk about estimation, that means we're going to do some rounding and multiply. So this 7.2 is the same thing as right at 7. If we round it to the nearest whole number, it's going to go to 7. The 6 is already to the nearest whole number, so we'll leave that as 6. So times 6. So if we were to multiply these two numbers together, we would get 42. So that tells us that our overall answer needs to be around 42. Okay? So now if we look at our first step, we're going to line up our numbers. Okay? And we're going to pay attention to just the numbers themselves and not the decimals. So what I like to do is not put any of the decimals in my problem yet. So I'm going to write it as 72. Okay? And then I'm going to put the 6 right underneath the 2. Now what I like to do is go back and put the decimals in my numbers so that I don't forget them. And now I'm ready to multiply. So I've lined up my numbers. Now I'm ready to solve. 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times 7 is 42. Plus 1 is 43. Now, based on our estimate, my answer's got to be somewhere around 42. So could my decimal go here and have a 432 as an answer? No. Could it go here as a 43.2? Seems reasonable. That's pretty close to 42. Could it go between the 4 and the 3? Then my answer would be 4.3. Well, that's kind of a far distance away from 42. What if it was 0.4? No. So based on my estimate, my answer, my decimal can only go between the 3 and the 2. Simple as that. So let's look at one more with estimation before we actually look at the rule. So in this particular one, first step again is line up our numbers. So I'm going to write 324 with no decimal point. The 3.24, no decimal. Then I'm going to put the 7. So now I'm ready to multiply. So I'm going to find my decimal where it is and put it into my numbers now that I have them lined up. Okay, it's just easier to pay attention to where the decimal goes if I know my numbers are already lined up. So now I multiply. All right? Well, let's first do an estimate. So this one, if I round 3.24, it's going to round to 3. And then the 7 is still just a 7, so 3 times 7. So my answer should be somewhere around 21 when it's all said and done. Okay, so now I multiply. 7 times 4 is 28. 7 times 2 is 14. 15, 16. Carry the 1. 7 times 3 is 21. Plus 1 is 22. So I know my answer's got to be somewhere around 21. So could my decimal go here for 2,268? No. What about 226? No. What about 22.6? Well, that's pretty close to 21. So my decimal goes right there. Now you'll notice in the first one, we had one number behind the decimal in our answer. In our second problem, we had two numbers. So how do I determine where my decimal is going to go in the answer? Well, that's when we have a rule. Okay, and the rule is you count the digits to the right of the decimal in each number in the problem. Okay, so if I were to go back to this first one and say in this first number, there's one place, And the second number, well, there's no decimal in this particular number, so where is it at? It's actually right here. And there aren't any numbers to the right of my decimal. So there's one number total to the right of my decimal. In the second one, we had two numbers to the right of my decimal here. And again, the decimal here is at the end, so there's 0 numbers. So there's 2 total places. So now how do I figure out where my decimal goes? I move the decimal to the left in my answer, the number of digits you counted in the problem. Okay, so in the 432, if I've only got one place that's going to be behind the decimal, well, in a whole number, the decimal's here at the end, so I'm going to move the decimal one place. Okay. In this number, we had 2, 2, 6, 8. It says I'm going to move it 2 places, so I move it from the end in 2 places to actually find it between the 2. So whether you find where the decimal goes using estimation or find where it goes with the rule, it works either way. So again, to be able to figure out where your decimal is going to go, you're going to count the digits to the right of the decimal in each number in the problem, and that's how many places you're going to move the decimal to the left in your answer. So let's try one more. So this one's a little bit bigger. So step number 1, like we said in the original, up at the beginning, is line up your numbers as though the decimals weren't there. So I'm going to write this one as 2, 3, 5, 6, and then I'm going to write the 3, 6. Okay, so I lined up my numbers. So now I'm ready to multiply. So I'm going to put my decimals back in my problem so that I don't forget them. So I've got between the 3 and the 5 here, and between the 3 and the 6 here. Okay, so now I'm ready to multiply. Now I just multiply like I've always multiplied as though the decimals weren't even there. So 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 5 is 30. Plus 3 is 33. 6 times 3 is 18. Plus 3 is 21. 6 times 2 is 12. Plus 2 is 14. Now I move over a place for this number, so I add a 0 in the bottom. So 3 times 6 is 18, carry the 1. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16, carry the 1. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10, carry the 1. And 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So now I add. So 6 and 0 make 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 6, 7, 8, 4, and 8. So I end up with 8, 4, 8, 1, 6. Now I need to find out where the decimal goes. So in this first number, I have 2 numbers to the right of the decimal. In the second number, I have 1 number to the right of the decimal. So that means I need 3 total. So I take my decimal and move it from here, which is where it is in a whole number, and I go 1, 2, 3. And I place my decimal right there. So my answer is 84 and 816 thousandths. And that's how you multiply decimals. So let's review one more time. Step number 1, line up your numbers as though the decimals weren't there. Number 2, solve the problem. In other words, multiply. Put your decimals back in the problem so you don't forget them, and then multiply. And then the last step is put your decimal in your answer. And how do we find that? We find the place where it goes by counting the digits to the right of the decimal in each number in the problem, and then you move the decimal to the left in your answer, the number of digits that you counted in the problem. And that's how you multiply decimals. Until next time.